Hello everybody, and here we are for the long-awaited wet track update. And I've been looking forward to this one because I saw it firsthand at the Nürburgring Gran Turismo Sport FIA event, and I didn't get a chance to get my hands on it, but I did watch the racing and I had some minor concerns which I wanted to take a look at and couldn't really wait to drive it myself. So we wanted to find out here how realistic how realistic is the new wet driving model in Gran Turismo Sport. They've only released it at one track, which is a bit sad or frustrating. But I started here on the heavy wet tires. It was in the afternoon wet session where they have rain, and I was really interested to see, does it give you the same sort of feeling that you experience in real life on wet tires when you have decent amount of grip on the wets and going on a wet track. So initially, I didn't try any other tire. This is the first tire I drove, and as you can see, my first lap was a mess. I was overdriving and exited, so we had to go again. Almost killed myself there. Right, braking for turn one, usually in the wet. Okay, here's the fundamental thing, and it does vary from track to track, but fundamentally what happens is, as I explained in my video last week, my last onboard story when I was racing in the wet at Monza in real life, you want to avoid the racing line as much as you can. And as long as I can remember, sim games generally don't get this accurate or right. So the main thing is, A, avoid the racing line. So you brake on the inside of the line and then you try and cross over it, and just always keep your outside tires off the racing line. And the reason you do this is because the rubber from the track, from the dry running and all the oil that is on the racing line, gets lifted up by the water, which means that you essentially are oil and water don't mix, so you want to avoid that as much as possible. So in the sims, when I see a wet model, I'm always like, okay, if I stay off the racing line, will I get will I get more grip? And that was kind of what I was experimenting with here. So initially, you always, when you go to a wet track and it's raining, you don't actually start off the racing line. You start on the racing line and then you slowly move your way towards the outside just to see where that bite starts to come from. But initially, driving on the track, I did have quite a lot of grip directly on the racing line, and more concerning to me was that I could use the curbs quite comfortably without spinning out. So here, heading to turn one, ideally you want to brake off the racing line, sort of just to the inside, but when I braked on the racing line I had quite a lot of grip, and turn-in was reasonably good. There was no shudder, understeer, that's when your tires sort of shake. Just generally all round a lot of grip, but the, how can I explain, the car itself was kind of moving over the water in a satisfying way. So I enjoyed the feeling of the heavy wet tire on the wet track. And here, when you go wide and miss the apexes, it has a similar feeling, but not sort of what I was expecting. In the rain in real life, when you get on the brakes, for example, especially in a GT3, let's talk specifically about the GT3s, you have a lot of ABS locking if you press too hard on the brakes. And when that ABS fires in the rain, when it gets activated, you tend to miss apexes a lot. So here we have I'm pushing the brake pedal as hard as I want and not getting any sort of quote-unquote ABS locking. You're not really going to get that in Gran Turismo Sport, to be fair, but I was expecting a bit more sensitivity. What was concerning though was I was able to use a lot of the curbs, and especially on the exit of corners, and in the rain in real life you really want to avoid those. Yes, in Europe they tend to have more high grip painted curbs to cater for MotoGP, etc. Especially at a track like not A1 ring, that's the old school one, the Red Bull ring. But I was still able to use them a bit too much. If you're in a straight line, you'll see, again, if you compare this to my wet video from Monza, you will see that I am able to use the curbs a lot more, but only when I'm pointed in a straight line. If I touch the curbs with any steering angle on and throttle, I tend to lose the car quite a bit. So we skipped ahead a lap. This is my final lap on the heavy wets. Let's just run through it. So braking it for turn two, I was on the racing line. I'm missing the apex. As I'm sort of trying to simulate my real life racing lines. then going towards the inside, so cutting off the racing line again to get maximum traction, accelerating down to turn, well, what do they call that? That was turn 3, so now we're going to turn 5 or 6. I don't know, the Red Bull Ring corner numbers are always complicated. And then here, there's always not that much grip. It's actually a hairpin. It feels like a 90-degree corner when you take it in the game without looking at the track map, but it's a downhill braking hairpin, so there's never that much grip. This is one of my favorite corners around this track. I really like the long flowing nature of it. I like that when you get on the power, you can get a little bit of sort of oversteer, which you can balance with the throttle. And then just going through here again, in real life I would anticipate taking a slightly wider entry, but still staying here on the inside. I would not go near these curves in real life, just in case that I would run off the track and have an accident. And then here, braking a bit late, I was almost on the dry line braking there, to be honest with you. Using the curb on the exit, again, not what I would expect. There is if you search for the ADAC GT Masters, they had a wet race here, I think last year or the year before, and you can see some of the lines that the guys on wet tires are taking. One of the guy who won the race, Daniel Calvitz, he was actually on slick tires, but it wasn't raining as much as you see here. Okay, so so now we're going to end this run, and you can see here the potential was a 37.9. But now let's change to the intermediate tires, because I wasn't so clear if this was heavy wet or intermediate conditions, because of just basic game description. So I wanted to see how much quicker or slower we would go with the intermediates. Now, there was a lot of water on track from the visuals, and of course you can see the windscreen wipers going crazy, so it's raining. And generally, okay, at least in GT3s, we don't have an intermediate tire. We only use a wet tire, and that tire is pretty good even until the dry. I mean, we abuse the hell out of it when it is dry. We had this at Spa 24 where the track dried out in the first hour towards the end, and everyone's obviously stayed out on that wet tire because you don't want to waste a pit stop, and we were just kind of rally drifting everywhere. But with an intermediate tire, if the track is wet but it's not raining, like raining hard, then you should be okay, provided you get some temperature into the tire. But here you can see there's a lot of standing water, and we should be getting much more understeer and much more snap oversteer. So I just wanted to see how much quicker or slower was this tire around the track. And to be honest with you, this is where I started to get a little bit concerned with the new wet model. So immediately out the gate, I could feel that there was more grip. The car was gripping more. I still had that sort of wet sensation where the track is not 100% dry, and the car is still moving on top of the surface, but overall we still have a decent amount of grip, and more grip than the heavy wet tire. So fine, maybe the heavy wet tire is more like a monsoon tire, and maybe the intermediate tire is more like the wet tires that I'm used to in real life. The only thing is the heavy wet tire felt a bit more like the tires that I experience in the rain in real life. So I'm a little bit concerned at this point, to be honest with you. But anyway, we push now to turn 1, braking a little bit to the inside, moving back onto the racing line, and have so much grip that when I clip the apex, I feel like I can really get on the power quite aggressively. And I think at this point here, we're already 4 tenths up on the wet time. So clearly using the intermediate around here is the way to go. But we haven't yet finished our discovery process of this new physics model. So we're going to do 2 or 3 laps around here on the intermediates, and then we're going to do one final switch to another tire and just see again how the car feels in those conditions. Again, what I'm expecting here on with the thing with the intermediate tires, doesn't have as much tread depth as the wet, so you're sort of sitting more on top of the water. There was a little bit of snap oversteer. I do like the satisfying feeling of driving in the wet, and I'm looking forward to doing some online races. I'm pretty sure that next week they'll have a daily race around here, but they'll force you to only choose between the wet tires, and so far it looks like the intermediate is the way to go. I need to also try the dusk wet version of this track just to see if there's any differences, but I figured that this is a good enough test. I just wish that they put the wet conditions around at least one other track, maybe like Barcelona or something. But again, GTSport is not actually their final game, if you want to say. Let's look forward to Gran Turismo 7, I think, which will be quote-unquote more complete. But I'm not complaining. This game overall gives me already a lot of what I'm looking for. Okay, so much quicker immediately with the intermediates, almost a second up. 6/10 quicker than my wet run in terms of the potential lap time. Okay, but now let's try the super softs. So we are going now to a slick tire. Now, when I raced a Formula 1 game on PlayStation 1 back in the day, when I was still discovering that you could use a computer game to learn how to drive better in real life. I think I was maybe 12 or 13 years old. I hadn't yet started karting or anything. There was a cool Formula 1 game on PlayStation, I forget which year, I forget the name, where if it was raining and you put on the wet tires, you would have crazy conditions. I mean, crazy handling, really difficult handling. But if you put on the slick tire in rain conditions, you'd have dry handling. So the handling of the car had nothing to do with what you saw on the track. Their model only changed if you changed the tire. So they were tricking you. Okay, you saw rain, you assumed that you had to do a rain tire, and then you'd struggle around the track. But if you put on the slick tire, you would have plenty of grip as if you were in the dry. There was no difference. So when I went from the heavy wet to the intermediate and noticed that I had a lot more grip on the intermediate, I was a little bit concerned. I was like, oh boy, what happens if I put on the slick tire in these conditions? Now, granted, we're on the super soft tire here, and in real life, if you had a super soft tire and it was warm, you'd have some grip on track. I mean, the tire temperatures would drop quite quickly, but you'd have some grip. But the key thing is, you'd have no ability to drive through the wet patches, and curbs would be a death wish. Okay, so here I am on a slick tire, keeping up with my intermediate tire, which was quicker than the heavy wet tire. And this was a concern. Braking now for the last corner, I think we do 2 or 3 laps on this tire just to get a feeling. Braking quite late, having the grip, using the racing line, using the curb, having no issues in terms of grip, and actually catching my intermediate tire run a little bit towards the exit. Starting a new lap, we're going to stay on the racing line, I believe. I'm commentating separately to the actual run itself. Okay, braking almost at the dry point, using a lot of curb, well, clipping the curb on the outside, would usually expect snap oversteer, maybe a spin, something drastic, and then zero traction on the exit. But staying with the car in front, this Ghost is the intermediate tire run, and again, braking almost where they're braking. To be honest with you, I was a little bit unsighted by my Ghost, finding a good apex because the front end grip was there, staying slightly off the racing line for what appeared to be better traction, and still staying way too close to the intermediate tire, to be honest with you. This was quite concerning, and I just don't know why. Yeah, I'm curious to know what the thinking was behind this, because frankly, you shouldn't be this close when you're using a slick tire in the rain. You should be much further away. And I'm just wondering if Gran Turismo, and this is purely speculation, is modeling the wet conditions based on the tire that you use, and then given the daily race or FIA race, they will force you to use that tire. I'm now ahead of the intermediate tire run. Again, using quite a lot of curb, and yes, I do get a lot of snap, but it's manageable snap, and it's not as scary as in real life. If you run a slick tire in real life, it's a whole new thing. So we go to end this lap. In the end, I think we match the intermediate time, not much quicker, but still concerning that I was able to get close in these conditions on a slick tire. Again, using the curb. But anyway, there you go. There's my wet tire analysis. I hope you found it interesting, and I'm looking forward to doing some races around here, even with the right tire. But I do hope that further improvements will be made to the physics in the wet going forward. Thank you so much to my Patreon subscribers, members, and also to my channel sponsors, specifically Thrustmaster. Check out my swag on Coach Dave, and I'll catch you around the next lap.